Welcome to Common Pitfalls of Jamf Administration and How to Fix Them. Here presenting, we have Jamf Pro Services Engineer Matthew Phillips. If there's time at the end for questions, please use the mics in the center of the room for those. Without further ado, please welcome Matthew.
All right. Hey. So, yeah, it wasn't until late last night that I had a panic mode where I was realizing the session title has how to fix them in it, and I went through my notes and was like, how many solutions do I actually give? Because it's mostly just horror stories of things I've seen. And, I mean, I think as long as we address the issues and we talk about why they happen or how they happen, then you can kind of infer how to avoid it or overcome it, and we can maybe talk about it later. So, hopefully it's not too bad. As Betty said, my name is Matthew Phillips. I'm actually an implementation engineer. My role has changed since we set up that intro. In the IE world, we've taken the PSE's abilities and put them in front of the sale, sort of in the pre-sales conversations to build solutions to get customers over to Jamf. And when I was a PSE, I had the opportunity to go out to many, many different customer sites and experience so many different environment sizes and shapes, and really got to see stuff I had never thought someone would implement. So hopefully I'm going to be able to share some of it with you today. Pitfall, right? So last year I did a King's Quest theme for our Going to Jamf Cloud, so this time I figured I'd give you the expert strategy guide. We're going to go over management of Macs, iOS devices, cloud, on-prem servers, user experience. We're going to cover all of it if there's time. And as you might have noticed from the session description, we're not going to go into anything too technical. This session is rather about going over the situations that Jamf admins find themselves in, how to get out of them, but also sometimes things that are put upon them, situations they find themselves thrust into with no choice but to say okay. We gathered conversations up from pro services, support. We reached out to people at APAC and EMEA, and we tried to get a lot of topics. I looked over Jamf Nation for things to talk about, but I decided to keep some of those out of this presentation. So we're going to touch on binding at some point, if that's still a thing that's going on anywhere in this audience. We're going to attempt to capture that elusive creature, the best practice. I will try and prescribe some medicine for your analysis paralysis, and we'll talk about what that is. And hey, this is a good one. Documentation. We're going to talk about documenting the documentation, and then after you document it, make sure it's documented. So that's something that no one bothers doing. And hey, we all make mistakes, right? Mistakes happen. But what I have found is that you can make a mistake quietly and no one needs to know about it. If we succeed, we'll figure out how to make sure you know how to use all the tools that you have at your disposal. So, as I said, we are going to talk about binding. And quick show of hands, if we could. How many people here bind their Macs to Active Directory? Oh my low-K. I'm going to step out into the expo and grab a donut. That's far more hands than I thought I'd see. The thing is, device management in every market, in every country, and every Jamf customer, you feel like you're swinging over the same pit over and over again, and you're not alone, right? In my experience, it's rarely a technical problem, like an outright technical blocker that says, we can't do it, the wires just won't cross. It's usually something far more nefarious than that. If it were to be something like your manager comes up and says, hey, we want to put this Windows mobile app on an iPad and run it. You go, no, that can't be done. End of conversation. Usually it's something more like we need a user-based certificate generated on a Mac when there's a just-in-time user created, and we want to make sure there's a pretty branded user experience, and we all want that to happen on the Wi-Fi at Starbucks. And you're like, perfect, cool. I mean, it can be done, but it's really involved. There's lots of steps to that. So just because it's not technologically possible doesn't mean that it can't be done, right? The most common non-technical issues I've seen usually boil down to these topics. No buy-in from upper management, right? You just can't get anyone to agree to let you do the thing. Conflict from other teams like InfoSec, networking, security teams that just say no to every single firewall request. And money, time and staffing, or more accurately, a lack of any of those three. We also see tradition as a thing, which is more like we've always done it that way. And also misunderstandings, so things that you just didn't know are possible. Wow. So blockers, as we're going to call them, come in all shapes and sizes. First up, we have the political issue, right? And that's something when two teams can't get along. Example I give is like if there's multiple MDMs under one roof. The iOS is managed with that other company, and Macs are managed with Jamf. That's never fun. So a very strict InfoSec group that's got firewall rules, those sorts of things. And my personal favorite is when management won't believe it until they see it, right? You got to prove it, but they're not going to approve any time or money to do it, and they still expect you to do your main job all the time and be accountable. So like no wonder why it takes 6 months to a year to roll something out. As far as best practice is concerned, we hear this a lot with Jamf, both in new customers and also decade-long customers who are just looking for validation, where they say, what is everyone else doing? Well, it doesn't matter, because every environment is different, and when you want the best practice, you need to figure out what that best practice is for you. So, we like to actually call it better practice. And of course, the ye old legacy workflow. Here we see a customer stuck in a rut. They just do it because it's safe, it's validated, it's been approved, and there's never time or money to innovate. My favorite one is the guy that built it doesn't work here anymore, and I don't really know Python, and it just works, so we leave it. Right? That sounds familiar. Too many laughs from that one. So that brings us directly to analysis paralysis, which is the scientific name for a given scenario where you are overwhelmed by looking at the change that you need to put into the Jamf server. And it can be paralyzing, right? I myself have had that situation. I would go on site as a PSE for 3 days. In the first hour, the customer tells me, let's get zero touch working. We want a splash screen. It's like, cool, that's simple. And FileVault's kind of broken, and they need to bind on the wire, and I think APNS is blocked on our internal network. But we can make this work, right? We got 3 days. And I said, sure, show me your test server. And they're like, cool, okay, so don't panic, but we don't have a test server, right? Are we still going to be able to do this in 3 days? And it's like, probably not. So the biggest reason I see Jamf admins panic over this is because they don't have a safe place to test their workflow. And it's imperative that you have a dev environment of some kind. We talked about binding. You guys put up way too many hands. But show of hands how many people have an active, accurate test environment. Way less hands. Way less hands. So, and there's a lot of reasons why you might not. And maybe you don't actually even know what you have. There might be one lying around. But when I lose my place, I'll just kind of vamp. Right, we're going to go on to the agenda. No time to test. So getting out of the bind is almost, I won't use imperatives, but almost every reason I've heard to bind a Mac, there are other ways to do it, right? Again, there might be non-technical reasons why you're not allowed to not bind, but usually when it comes down to the reasons, there are alternatives. Here we can see a list of reasons why people say they need to bind. They're like, we need the certs, we gotta get certificates, we need those network shares, those mounts, and with the AD group and the GPOs and things, stuff happens with that. And password policy, that's a thing, we need that. And my favorite, we don't really know why we bind. Which is a totally valid thing to say. And the thing is, there are better ways, right? In some of these cases, the managers think they're getting something from binding, like GPOs or some kind of password policy or something that the Macs aren't even acknowledging. but we're not going to get into that. This is more just for talking. There are technical sessions, you've probably already been to them. Here's a few products that Jamf has. These are features that will lead you to your unbounded greatness. And Jamf Connect allows for identity management. It has that AD conversation. Azure AD with conditional access gives you some of that sort of like GPO type access control. ADCS connector was going to give you the freedom to issue certificates on behalf of AD. Oh, I just found somewhere where I'm not in the light. Perfect. Had a wicked glare since I started. Yeah, ADCS connector is going to be able to have that conversation for AD. And Jim, or the Jamf Infrastructure Manager, is going to have that LDAP conversation for you, so you don't have to open up your directory. So fear of change, right? That's the analysis paralysis we were talking about. Change can be overwhelming, and I've heard the same general complaints about it, right? Jamf management's overwhelming, switching workflows is hard, hey, getting approval takes too long. But those are kind of lame excuses, you know? Because all of these sort of have a way around it if you're able to prove the value or the worth of the thing that you're trying to implement. And a lot of times that means do it on the side or do a different project and build it out completely, even if it's a faked video or something you found online, and then show it and go, look, this is awesome and we can have this. The next step is obviously working with people, even at Jamf or not, to get it implemented so that you don't take down your entire server while trying to roll out this new thing. Change can be easy. I have this outline here, and I was going to read it over. It's one of those, oh, it sounds easy when you say it, right? You just identify the issues, you break them apart, you solve each issue individually, and then, well, you bolt them together with like a script or a series of policies, and then you do some other stuff with config groups and smart groups and iOS profiles, and then you move it over into your test server, you make sure it doesn't break anything, and then once it's good to go, you push it all into prod. Bob's your uncle. It never works like that. But if you have a decent test environment and a validated, documented process for how to make changes and how to test things in your environment, you can do it without breaking stuff. So that's all well and good, right? You say, I'm kind of looking at the faces, and you're probably all shaking your head very slowly like, that's not how it works in the real world. Because it's not, right? I would come out and I'd build a really cool thing and I'd whiz bang it up and I go, here it is. You figure out how to roll it out over the next 6 months and not piss any of your users off. But if you have a test environment, you can work on that. The other thing we've noticed at Jamf is that there's a lot of cruft and a lot of bloat in your server that you've had for 10 years, or you've not bothered getting rid of those things from that guy that doesn't work there anymore. You really should take the time to clean all that out, and you don't have to fear losing something if you've got a copy of that somewhere else in a dev server sitting there in your sandbox or on a Mac Mini at your desk. Then prod can actually be as smooth and svelte as it needs to be. You can run them on hypervisors, you can test in VMs, but eventually you'll need to test on a real Mac, obviously, and then you'll of course need to test those things with real people. And listen to me right now, you guys are not real people. You're not the users. Right? You're Tron. You're the Mac admins. You fight for the users. You're not the users. Because every time you say, oh, run the script, it works. And you put it on and it's got Python 2 code and Python 3 code and something that came from Homebrew. And you're like, it doesn't work. Works on my Mac. Of course it does. It's not going to work on a user's Mac. So I don't want to make any product announcements because they don't let me do that. But I do have a surprise for you. I want you all to know that every single customer in this room gets a free development server. You get a dev server. You get a dev server. Everybody gets their own dev server for Jamf testing, right? You may not remember this from your Jumpstart, and you may not want to admit it to your manager, but I put that up there so the Oprah's people don't come after me. But you can build your own Jamf test server, okay? And if you don't want to, because maybe you're a cloud customer, you still can, right? We still offer that download for you, and it's not a bad idea to have one kicking around to do silly things on. If you insist on being a cloud-only customer, I don't blame you for that, you can certainly request a development server, a test server, if you will. And that kind of comes down to identifying the name or the function of the server, because when we talk to people at Jamf and you ask for something like a dev box or a test box, those words can get misconstrued because the meaning implies the functionality of it or maybe the horsepower behind it. So I have a kind of understanding that when we say sandbox, we're talking about a play space where you can just learn and test and break it all the time. Doesn't matter, it's a toy. Test or dev, kind of interchangeable. You can use those for testing out your actual workflows. You have a lot more pieces inside of them. It's a little bit more functional. It might be linked to some of the Apple systems or Apple resources for like automated enrollment and app deployment. And then UAT, or PreProduction, as some people call, is really for the real-world sanity check. That's a production server that isn't in production. It should be as good as the fully fledged with just a few devices in it. So all of the policies and all of the workflows and all of your smart groups are in there. It lets you take your workflow that you've tested and you put it in there and see what breaks. And that'll help you build a workflow for rolling out that change into the production server. Because of that, UAT and PreProduction should be as close to a clone of your prod as possible, right? Because we're not testing if the thing works, we're testing how can we roll it out? How can we implement it without shutting down management to all of the devices? Because I've been on site while that happens, and they get really angry. I mentioned moving from servers to servers, taking something from your UAT or pre-prod environment and putting it up into Jamf. Can be done with Jamf Migrator. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's a pretty cool tool. It leverages the API, puts a GUI behind it, lets you pick and choose what you take over to the server. I actually made one of those, because those are cool. I don't know if they'll actually work from your phones. Anyone want to? I was hopeful it would. I guess I could try it. Cool. So that's how you can go and download Migrator. It's a really cool tool. You can use a test server to test your upgrades. You can use a test server to test your restores. You need to feel really good about that process and have it documented. So upgrades don't scare you and there's no outages. And I think of it as an opportunity to dress rehearsal or dry run your upgrade process. So when you're going through an upgrade, obviously this is for on-prem customers, but this does not specifically limit cloud customers for doing this thing, because you could have a copy of your environment and you could go through the process of upgrading to the new Jamf server and you could see what breaks before everyone else knows about it. This is kind of one of those fail quietly moments. Don't take snapshots. Well, you can take them if you want, but don't rely on them because they shouldn't be relied on. Backups are truly backup for a reason. We have a backup tool that cleans the database and it does things. Take that backup, put it somewhere safe, and then put it somewhere else. Have it in 2 places, and then start your upgrade process. Just little things that I've learned the hard way. So the other cool thing that I've offered to people is, take that backup and actually restore it once in a while. Take your database and go shove it into a Jamf server and go, oh, it doesn't work. The Tomcat won't load. It's like, well, you rely on that backup and you just assume it's good. Well, validate it once in a while. So talking upgrades, you probably don't need to worry about upgrades as a Jamf Cloud customer. I should do this one. I didn't think about it. Jamf Cloud customers in the house? Okay. So then the reverse, right, would be on-prem customers in the house? So then there's a lot of not customers in the house. That's cool. Okay. So like I said, you can still do it, but also lets you have the opportunity to test betas, which if you haven't signed up for, you should. You can request a beta instance. You can create your own beta instance, grab a MacBook that's laying around, put it on there. And this lets you test the next OS, the next Mac OS, against the next Jamf software. So the other tab that's up there, products. How many people read this red box? Yeah. How many people's eyes glaze over and think it's like an ad that has pop-up blocker turned on? I don't read it because I think that someone would have told me if it's important. We try very hard to put the critical information here, which is the conflicts and the things that do not try and do an upgrade unless X, right? It's not necessarily going to tell you about product issues or weird little eccentricities with that one thing that you're still doing with, MCX or something. There's certainly going to be conflicts that aren't outlined here, but a fantastic place for that is the release notes. If you're not subscribed to the release notes and you don't check them daily like it's the news, you're just not jamfing right. So it's the best place to check on what has happened and what's going to happen to the next version. The other place to go is Jamf Nation. And this is a fantastic place to find issues discussed. It is not a place to go with your problems. As I said, I didn't pull any discussions from here because take them with a grain of salt. You're not necessarily certain that it's a valid Jamf answer. So nothing you read on Jamf Nation really should supersede what you've been told by support. But this is an example of Johnny New User here asking for help, and this is not the right place for that. You should call Jamf. Or well, definitely call Jamf, actually, or text or email or chat. Cool. We're doing on time. All right. So these are lessons we've learned from Jamf support. These are things that came back from me, and they're like, you got to tell them this. If you're on stage, you make sure they know this. Clean up your Jamf server, right? An upgrade and a backup and a restore, and all of those processes work great if it's clean and doesn't have a bunch of old cruft in it. Read all the relevant documentation. We talked about that. Give yourself enough time. If you're doing a restore, if you're doing a backup, and you've scheduled an upgrade process, I actually would try and scare the customer into saying, what you need to do is schedule your upgrade to be the amount of time it will take you to completely rebuild all of your servers from your backups. And then, well, it's going to take like 4 hours, 12 hours probably. And you go, cool, schedule it, and then hope that you don't have to use it. And you look like a god when it's done in an hour. And they're like, well, how'd that upgrade go? Went smooth. Because of all the testing we do, because of all the prep work. So, reading the relevant notes and things could definitely save you from a botched backup. And then this one I never even think about, which is check the available space on your drives. Sometimes you just hope that that server is infinitely huge, and it isn't. I just went way off script, huh? Cool. So we're going to go into some, did I skip something? Best practice. Yeah, we can't call them best practice because it's not a thing. Better practice is the right word for it. How about best for your environment? Best practice for you. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, right? Some things that that you can do. These are sort of simple tricks, or this may be old hat for you, or this may not apply to you if you only have iOS devices. But if you've got a bunch of policies that are all referencing the same installer, don't do that. It's a waste of time. Because when you go and upgrade that installer, or you change that out, or you need to not do that anymore, you now have to replace it in 3 to 5, 10 places. There's an opportunity to leverage triggers, and you could instead, oh, there, I had a button for it. You could instead make a main policy, one single policy that does the PKG installer. It's scoped to all, set to ongoing, has no actual trigger other than the custom. And then every other policy that you want to reference that, you just say, run this policy. And then it goes and does that one. Then, when and if you need to change your package, you do it in one place. And you don't have to worry about deploying 2 versions of the same app. So, Dominos, right? Policy chaining, we call it. Policies that call other policies. That's what I just showed you, which was a policy that runs, and at the end of its action, it goes sudo jamf policy do the thing, either by the ID number or the event name. This is great, but careful with it, right? Because if you create this ridiculously long domino chain, oh, this policy calls this one, and this one, I can use this 40-foot stage, and this one calls this one. When something falls down, then none of it's going to finish. So there's a better way to do it, obviously. There you go. The better way to do it would be potentially script it, right? Scripting is scary, right? But that's a script. 3 policies, all in order. You control the order, and you can have a sleep, or you can have logic, or you can do all kinds of cool things, and that's calling 3 different policies. So when something goes wrong, you've got one place to check, and you've got a pretty decent log of what happened. Next is the shotgun approach. I don't know if anybody's seen this. Check all the things. And you go, what are you doing that for? Well, you want to make sure it runs, right? And that's true, but at the same time, it's a pain to troubleshoot because you got to figure out why it's running, when it's running, what caused it to run. You're better off just picking one trigger, usually, right? And if it be at check-in or the self-service one. Also, I'm a huge fan of custom because as soon as you start getting into advanced deployments, you really want to start leveraging that custom trigger. And I'm surprised sometimes by a lot of people like, yeah, custom triggers, right, those are cool. What do they do again? It's a conversation I've had where it's like, I mean, I'm not going to say I knew about it. I was pretending to know about it in my early Jamf career. So it gives you a lot more control. Don't shotgun policies. And sites. We're going to talk about sites. This slide was originally called Don't Use Sites, but someone told me not to put that on the screen. Sites are probably for someone else. Can I see who's using sites? A lot less people than I. Cool. The thing is, sites usually get mismanaged, right? You've got a new customer that's like eager, coming off his jumpstart, and he puts together a bunch of sites like prod and pre-prod and testing don't touch because they don't have a test environment. They use a site, and that's not the right place for it. All right. You should really only use sites when different devices are being managed in very different ways. Like a Mac lab and the iOS team, they don't talk to the Mac guys. And that office out in London, they're different because we don't have to talk to those devices. They're on their own VPP, they're on their own whatever. Sites are meant to make things easy for you, not make more work. Every time you make a policy and you don't put it in a site, it's just sitting there in the full Jamf. You can't find it, you can't get to it. It's like extra steps that if you just didn't bother with sites entirely, instead organize your devices in a different way, you might have a better time at it. Also, smart group abuse. So, smart groups are a really quick way to mess up a Jamf server, right? Remember that they're constantly being recalculated, and try not to nest criteria inside of other criteria. I found that when building smart groups, it's easy to focus on what is happening and not what is not, because double negatives and like exclusion groups are always really hard to comprehend on the fly. If you can figure it out, by all means, you have spatial awareness that I don't. But the other thing is naming, right? So name the smart group what it does and not what it's for, right? So don't make a smart group called like troublemakers. What the heck is that? Right? Instead, make it portables who are not encrypted. And then when you go to scope, you're looking for something, they're like, that's what I need. So often I've went and made a smart group, and then gone into a policy, and then went to scope, and I scroll down and I find like 3 different slightly worded versions of the same thing I just made. So if you have a really solid naming scheme, which is like the verb, the thing that it is or isn't, and if it always follows that, or maybe you have application up front, whatever you do to follow your naming convention, if you follow it, you won't ever find yourself making multiple of the same smart group. Because Jamf will calculate both of them, just the same. Here's a fun one. I don't know if you guys can figure this one out. Boot drive % remaining. Not a great name, but will it show us max with 90% full, or will it show less than? A lot of times, they're like, well, it's % full, right? So we'd be like 90 and above. We'll get an error message. No, it's going to show you drives with less than 10% full, like basically empty hard drives. It's a useless group, but I've seen it in production. Another form of smart group abuse is using them for metrics, trying to get an idea of what's going on in your environment by checking in on your smart group members. That's not where you should be doing that. You should be using an advanced search. It's only calculated when you run it, right? It's not used for scoping. It's only used for reporting, metrics, and occasionally the mass action if you want to choose to take one. But I've seen the hesitation to make two because it seems like redundant effort. Like, well, I've got the smart group over here. I might as well just use that. But if you need it for a report, go ahead and make the exact same criteria over in an advanced search because that's what that's for. Also, commenting. It's kind of like documentation, but it's smaller. Notes, little notes to future you, right? You can do it in a script, easy enough, but you want to make sure. I wrote that once, right? I don't know what this does, but Rich made it, and Der Flounder doesn't do anything wrong. So pretend that you're going to forget everything in a year, and you're going to come back to a thing and open it up and go, what was I thinking? Because you're going to forget. So put a note to yourself, and it will help you avoid peril. Also, when it comes to naming, I'm dancing slightly towards naming, and I'll get to a very important slide here next. Try to avoid names like test and working and do not delete, because these are just ridiculous. If they're testing, they shouldn't be in your prod server. They should be in your test server. Also, don't use silly names like don't delete me, V2, because where did V1 go? Did it get deleted? Who knows this guy? Talking Moose. So Bill Smith and his chicken have a fantastic session that I started watching to help build this presentation. And I realized there's absolutely no point in me talking about naming and taxonomy because he nailed it. I encourage you all to watch it. Even if you've seen it, watch it again because he talks about moving beyond once per computer, but he also strictly goes over the right way to name things and picking a solid workflow for your naming convention. I did put a little bit on here about documentation, right? Once you have a naming scheme and once you have a rigid flow, I started writing out documentation. Accurate naming is important. Outline each step. Include screenshots, please. It makes it so much easier to do. Like, that's what I did. If the click in the certificate profile, okay. And then be thorough and complete. And I didn't bother finishing the documentation because I hate documentation. So we all mess up, right? We all make mistakes. And that's okay as long as you do so, and I said this before, you do this so quietly. If you are extraordinarily awesome, because we all are, your few mistakes that you make are probably going to be catastrophic, and they're going to get noticed by a lot of people. Because in Jamf, you can make a few keystrokes and do a lot of bad things really quickly. So that's, again, where you would do these tests and you would figure that out in your test environment, and only you and your underlings need to know about it, right? And then you can fix it, and then you can present that to your manager as, I solved a problem today, and I'm not going to get fired. Because I have been on the cutting edge of building policies and trying to corral iOS devices and catch things before it propagates across the entire environment. And then you make a policy to fix that policy, and then you have to make a policy that cleans up what you did, and then you have to make a script that deletes the logs. So, like I said, you can mess up in dev, no one will know. Mistakes are learning opportunities, right? It's never fun to learn in the spotlight when your manager's breathing down your neck. You're never going to remember those moments that you figured out what you should have done better. So these are some steps that'll help you. And we've gone over them. Follow documentation process, test small, scale up, right? Get feedback from actual users. Let them do it. You know, you will click through menus because you know what they say. Let your user do it and watch them fail miserably at it and go, oh, okay. And then you'll learn to add a few things, like pretty buttons. Cool. So don't ever guess at what you're doing. Let's take a look at this. Corporate 802.1x Wi-Fi with skep certs. Redistribute to all 36,000 devices. Does that scare you? It makes me cringe a little bit, right? Because honestly, you'd never want to do that, but this I did for example. This is a situation where you go, oh, which one? I remember there's something about you click the one that, just hit cancel, call Jamf, right? Because we're here to help, and we will guide you through that process. I put on here avoid making super mega policies. I realize we're not getting too deep into this, but the idea that you've got to have the one master policy that's in self-service, and it changes its icon, and it does 6 packages, and it does a few scripts, and it also installs the printers, and it's this Mondo thing. It has one function, and you can't use it. It's hard to test. It's hard to debug. These are good if you're not looking to be more, dynamic or agile, and you know that you're never going to get all of the devices with every single time. So instead of trying to build that policy that works in all scenarios with these extra smart groups and trying to catch all the little stragglers, from the different environments, just make one that's for this group and make one for that group. And really, there's no shame in having 100 extra policies as long as they're organized and named correctly and you understand them. You don't have to bolt them all together. So this is everyone in this room, right? I don't often test, but when I do, I test in prod, and I do it on my own Mac. I learned the hard way, actually coming back from a flight in Florida, where I was working on a mobile managed to local user creation script. We were migrating a company away from AD. And I was testing it on the plane, and it deleted my entire home directory on the plane. By the time I got to it, damage was done. So I had nothing better to do than to watch the tiny little screen that's part of the in-flight entertainment, because my computer was hosed. So get a test Mac, right? I mean, ideally, we would think that we all can sway a budget for like a test device or two, but make sure you have one. And force yourself to use it. Because running up a script, like in pro services, we'd get a coworker would send me a script. He's like, hey man, run this real quick. No. I won't run your script. Because all it did was just flip and invert the screen, black and white, back and forth. So Jamf is extremely powerful. Absolute power can corrupt, right? It's not cool to leverage all of the features of Jamf if it's going to impact your users' ability to do their job. I get it. There are environments when this is necessary, a kiosk or a school or something. But for the most part, just focus on what's absolutely essential to get the Mac secure and configured with the bare minimum and get it in the hands of the users. Let them deal with it, right? So that was actually really hard to accomplish, getting just those things locked down. Because it turns out you can't get into the profiles if you lock it down. So, troubleshooting, support, figuring out what has happened, what went wrong in your test once it's in the hands of actual users. Get logs. So often I get a ping from somebody who's like, hey, I need help with a thing. And it does this, they explain it, and you go, cool, what did the Jamf log say? I don't know. Well, what was the console log on the Mac? I don't know. So, if you can get it directly from the users, if not, acquire the machine. But these are the things that will give you the power to actually solve a problem. The Jamf agent logs, Mac system logs, any scripting that you're doing, those are going to hopefully dump out to a log that you've decided, policy. Now, Jamf Marketplace is a fantastic thing. I am so happy that Charles decided to invent such a wonderful place for things to go. GitHub and Stack Overflow, honestly, are, I think, why we're all here today. It's certainly why I'm standing on the stage. It has helped me look like I know what I'm talking about. But be wary of solutions you find online. Even though it says it works and it's functional and it maybe even works in your environment, if you didn't write it and you don't know exactly what it's doing, it could potentially have negative effects. Or at the very least, when you try and customize it for your environment, you're probably going to break it instantly. So I'm not saying to go learn the language that it's written in, although you could, you should. But at least try and understand what it's doing. Maybe even run through the script and add comment codes to each line that say what you think it's doing. Sometimes that helps. So, the old internet there, too long didn't read, cheat sheet. These are basically kind of boil it down to if I hadn't bothered giving all these jokes, this is the session. Mistakes compromise the faith in the management workflow. Too many mistakes, too many times, someone's going to start to go, I think this Jamf thing's not right for us. And it may not be the case, it just might, you burn them too many times and they're really weary of the scenario. And it could not even be mistakes, but maybe like one too many migrations in a year or something. Somebody else's solution might not be right for you. Don't make extra work for the users, obviously. Build a test server, please. Use the test server. A simple approach is always the best approach, and document everything. And I guess I skipped a slide, because I remember having a whole section on this. Share your documentation. Put it out there for your team. Put it somewhere useful, because if it's all on your computer in a folder somewhere, that's basically like it being in your head. And it's not a matter of job security, necessarily, like, oh, I don't want everyone to know what I do. It's more like, let other people know what you do, so A, they can appreciate it, but also, you can move on to go do other things. And that is the end of my session. So we've got a bit of time, I think. Thank you. Thank you. I can't imagine I actually sparred any questions, but does anyone have any questions? No. Cool. Well, thanks for listening to me tell my horror stories.